So all these guys and we all write in the same general milieu, that big mystery, crime, thriller genre. Each one of the books we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to talk about their whole career, but the books I want to focus on, the books I've read, cover a great cross-section, within these disciplines. Brad has his central, his protagonist, top operative. We have, Nick has a war veteran coming back, suffering from PTSD. Danny Gardner and Elliot Caprice has a fallen cop who is now trying to put his life back together. And Jason jumped on a very timely topic and covered a particular election you guys may have heard about in his new book, The Castle, and he does a fantastic job. So jumping right in, I know it's kind of the iceberg lettuce of questions on these things, right? Like talking about process, we're talking about what it's like, but really reading all of these books, The Drifter, A Negro in Ofe, The Castle, Ring of Fire, I was struck by how much the plot hinged on the characters and the characters hinged on the plot. And I'm just wondering, I know it's the old plot versus pantser question, but I'm wondering, each of you guys, how did you approach it? Did you go with an outline? Because there's so much intricacy going on in these stories. And I know I read in your acknowledgement, Brad, where you're like, I want to kick my own ass because I bit off more than I could chew. I really thought I did. And I'm wondering how you approached, well, you can give a little bit of a synopsis about the plot as well.
Yeah, so Ring of Fire is basically, was the 15th anniversary of 9/11, and we had the Saudi complicity of causing 9/11 was coming up, the 28 redacted pages, that kind of stuff. It was all bubbling to a head. And so I decided to pick a target, which I picked the ports, for a spectacular attack, which turned out to be quite difficult to do. Mainly because the thriller's got to have pacing. It's got to have, it's got to be moving. And once a boat leaves a port, it's like Pike Logan's running around kicking butt doing this, and the boat's going brrr. I mean, I was like, this. You lock yourself into a timeline. I don't actually outline. I do what I call a framework. I know the threat vector. I'll know the start, and I'll think I know the finish, which generally works about 70% of the time. The finish will end the way I thought it did, and sometimes it won't. This one did not, as a matter of fact. I did not end how I thought I was going to end this book. But I definitely agree characters are absolutely number one with me. There's not a question in my mind that it's characters before plot. Plot, for me, is there to drive the characters. And the conflict and all that comes from the plot, but the characters are what matter. A bomb going off, and if you're reading about a bomb going off and you don't care if anybody gets hurt, then what's the point? You care if somebody's going to get hurt because you associate with the characters. The only way you're going to associate with the characters is if I put some time and effort into the characters, and the characters matter to me as much as they will to the reader. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much. Maybe you want to give a brief synopsis of The Drifter as well, Nick, and talk a little bit about your process in this.
Sure thing. So The Drifter is about a Marine Corps veteran who comes back from his war with post-traumatic stress in the form of claustrophobia. It makes it really hard for him to go inside. I thought about having him be agoraphobic, but it wouldn't be a very interesting book if he couldn't ever leave his house. So he's got some survivor's guilt. He goes to help the widow of a friend, and he discovers a Samsonite suitcase under her front porch with $400,000 and some C4, along with a very large, ugly, smelly, angry dog. And his first job is to take the dog out from under the porch. My process is kind of messy. To call it a process is a compliment. I don't particularly outline. I just sort of start with a situation and I write forward. There's always this horrible moment of despair in the middle where I really don't know what's going to happen, and I just sort of it's like vamping, right? You're waiting for the actor to come on stage. You're waiting for the next idea to come. So then there's a lot of deletions at that point. But so I didn't know how this book was going to end until 50 pages from the end. In the process of writing, it's not relaxing. But I was never in the armed forces. I got very interested in returning veterans because in my day-to-day life I run a building inspection business. So if you buy a house, you hire a guy like me to tell you what's wrong with it. I used to be a building contractor, and I had all these clients coming home kind of right after the crash, right after the surge, who, and I'd followed the news, but I realized with embarrassment that I hadn't really thought about the people. But so I am everything for me starts with character, and so I came up with a guy with a problem. And how does he work his way through? And it's not, part of it is how is he going to solve the plot piece, but what's he going to do with his life? I had a writing teacher once who said you should write to solve the problem of living. And I sort of like that as an idea that it helps it be a little more universal, and it helps you really think that you're thinking about big problems. And I don't have Brad's experience, I certainly don't have your contacts, so I can't dive into that kind of stuff. So I write about sort of smaller scale, good guys and bad guys, but I'm just winging it, and I'm in the middle of book 4, and I'm still winging it, and it's working okay. I keep waiting to get better at what I do, and I keep waiting to feel like I know what I'm doing.
Well, I'll tell you why I asked the question is there's a line in The Drifter, and the line, I wrote it down, is it would be interesting to see where this went next. And I'm wondering, if you both wrote that.
That would be me.
You wrote that as the author and the
yeah.
character. And as I read it, it was one of those meta moments, like, knowing how I do this myself, like, that's kind of you really don't know.
It would be interesting
Yeah.
to see what happened next, yeah.
Your shot, Danny.
Oh, all right. So we're starting with a
Brief
synopsis.
Yeah, and talking about.
Okay. Well, back cover copy version. It's set in 1952 in Chicago, in Chicagoland, outlying areas. My protagonist, Elliot Caprice, is an orphan. He was orphaned by the race riots in 1919 on the north side of Chicago, off of Lake Michigan. They call it the Red Summer, the meatpacking riots. And his mom was just some gal who was, I guess, slumming. And she was, Elliot's dad was black, his mom was white. She has him and drops him off with his old uncle from Mississippi up in farm country in Illinois, not too far outside of Chicago. Kind of like the same place where Frank Nitti would hide a whole lot of money for the Chicago outfit, in the corn stalks, I guess. And so, so he grows up with a certain level of angst. He's mulatto, they used to call it back then. And so he's neither fish nor fowl. He's too white for some things and too black for other things, and he's suffering. So when college doesn't... Oh, okay. I broke it already, damn it. When college doesn't work out for him, he signs up for World War II. And he does what every black man did after the war. He went to the big city, got a good government job. It just so happened to be taking, while he was drunk, the Chicago Police Department exam. And interestingly, there's a lot of stuff that Chicago was founded by a Haitian guy, like a black guy, who was married to a Native American. And so there's a lot of different social innovations in Chicago that weren't really happening everywhere else in the world. Like, the first black police chief ever was in Chicago. He wasn't the police chief for everybody. He was just the police chief for the black folks. But they realized that there needed to be separate policing strategies for this very large, very diverse community that they had when they wanted to hustle them in all these red-lined areas. So, one thing leads to another. He has a bit of a criminal past. So partly for atonement's sake and partly because they got him by the short hairs, he winds up getting caught up in the Kefauver Commission on Organized Crime back when they were investigating the Chicago outfit's influence over the Chicago Police Department. So, he becomes disgraced as a result. Some folks think he's dirty, some folks think he's a rat, and he winds up having to go back to rural Illinois to lay low, and he finds his uncle who raised him, which was a thankless job, dying in a flop house, and the family farm is in receivership with the bank. So he's desperate for a gig. He finds one as a process server, and a little while later than that, he gets mixed up in some really wealthy fat cat's murder, and it just gets really bad, and he's got to dig his way out of it. So now that sounds really out there, right? Like that sounds, but I don't know. I think it was a yearning. I kind of, like I always say, you have pantsers and plotters, right? And I
I plot until I pants, and then when I can't pants anymore, I go back to plotting. And it's just kind of what it is. Yeah. Like you said, right? Like you didn't know how your book ended until you got within the last 50 pages. Well, for me, for some reason, and I don't know if it's just like, being a comic and everything is about writing in order to say the words to people, or I don't know if it's, like my acting background, because, I studied Meisner for like 15 years, and therefore, words always are rooted in emotions. And, you've got the words, and then you've got the want behind the words that you have to deal with, but it always comes to me in dialogue. Like, for some reason, the first thing I hear about a story is what people are saying to each other. And then I wonder, well, what's the context? Why would they be having this conversation? So then when the context comes clear, then all of a sudden, the situation that created the context that makes the dialogue legit, makes it relevant, that kind of fleshes itself out. And if I sit still long enough, it all comes out on the page real cute. Let me see. I edit a lot, but not so much. I kind of find the story's rhythm in editing. The dialogue comes out real lovely. Like, the dialogue just comes out nice. Like, I know how people talk to each other. That's real cool. I studied that. I've lived that. I gotten in trouble for that. So, but then, where I get the beats and the prose, the rhythms, like being a jazz drummer, like I'm giving the rest of the story a pocket. Like, I'm just providing a pocket and everything's just kind of working. That usually happens in the first edit. And so I don't know where it comes from. I've learned to stop asking. I just know when I'm pregnant with story and my water breaks, I need to be somewhere, and I can't really do anything else. That's it. It's like, man, we had a trip to Disneyland not too long ago, and I'm like, y'all just going. I've taken my phone and gone to the bathroom at funerals to write down 500 words. I mean, he's dead. He ain't gonna mind. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where it is. It manifests first in the way, in what I hear people saying to each other. Then I wonder who those people are and why they would be saying to each other what they're saying. And then I wonder what kind of situation would produce that. And all of a sudden, I got a plot. I borrow a lot from history too, but that's another question.
Just to be very clear, I want to be aware if Danny's story water breaks next to me, just so I can get out of the way in time.
There's one now.
So I guess sort of a bit of a synopsis is as I was, and I'm sure all of you were over the last couple of years, watching the insanity and madness of the election and all the craziness, and just being just amazed by just how crazy it was. To me, I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of wrap a thriller plot around the 2016 election with my own characters, with my own story. So basically, the plot revolves around a young corporate strategist named Remy Stanton. He's sort of unfulfilled in his life. And one night, as he's walking home from getting a drink, he stumbles upon a couple about to get robbed. And he's in the right place at the wrong time, intervenes in the robbery, ends up saving this couple's life, but ends up taking a bullet in the process. When he wakes up in the hospital the next day, there's a beautiful young woman standing over him, and he's like, I know you. Turns out the woman is the daughter of a man named Rawson Griggs, who is a bold, brilliant billionaire businessman who's on the cusp of running for president. So he happens to have saved this man's daughter's life. Immediately, Remy becomes an overnight celebrity. He becomes the hero who saved the heiress to this incredible business fortune. And Rawson Griggs, knowing a valuable asset when he sees one, offers Remy a spot in his campaign. And what's one thing that a young, unfulfilled corporate drone can't resist? It's the possibility of money and power and fame. So Remy takes a job inside the presidential campaign of Rawson Griggs. He finds that the world is suddenly at his fingertips. He loves it. He gets closer to Elena Griggs, who's not what he thought she was. She's very different than her father. But as things go along, he starts to see a bit of a dark undercurrent amongst the campaign. He starts to see sort of dirty tricks on every side that cause him to question what he's doing, what he values, and is the promise of money and power and fame worth jeopardizing everything he cares about, both his dignity and literal people that he cares about. So to me, it was really just the notion of kind of wrapping this election, which was one of the most insane in history, into a thriller. And I'd say the impetus behind it actually was, I don't know if you know who this person is, but there's a woman named Hope Hicks, who is was previously the communications director for Donald Trump and is now one of his top aides. And she was basically his right-hand woman throughout much of the campaign. And her story fascinated me, not because she happened to be an aide to Donald Trump, but because she had come from nowhere. She was a young woman from a small town in the middle of nowhere with no political background whatsoever. She was actually a cover model for sort of like teeny bopper books at one point. And she happened to get a job at a PR firm and happened to do some PR work for Ivanka Trump, and all of a sudden ends up doing PR for Donald Trump. So I thought it was fascinating to take somebody with no political experience, a pure outsider, and throw them into the maelstrom of the most insane election in history. And that's where Remy Stanton came in. And in the past when I've written books, I always have sort of what I call 3 bullet points. Is number 1, I generally know how the story is going to begin. I know what's going to kick the plot into motion. I have one point around the middle-ish where I know that things are going to take a big turn. There's a big twist or a big change or something's going to happen that makes the story veer off into another direction. And I generally have an idea about how it's going to end. The trick with writing this book was that I needed to know what it was like to actually be inside a presidential campaign. So I might have had a bit of a framework, and I knew how it was going to start, and I knew a middle point, but I had to do a tremendous amount of research. So I talked to people who worked on Donald Trump's campaign and Hillary Clinton's campaign and third-party campaigns and campaign staffers and consultants and people who had worked on every facet of politics. And it was great because right before we started talking, every one of these people, without hesitation, would always say, "You're not going to put my name in this book, are you?" So I would say sort of like I'm a bit of a pantser. I don't write an outline, but I generally have a few bullet points as I go along. But this book really surprised me in the sense that even though the story was very much, I wanted it to be sort of ripped from the headlines, I loved writing these characters as much as anything I've ever written before. And not just Remy Stanton, my protagonist. I think it can be fairly easy to fall in love with your protagonist, but the character of Rawson Griggs I fell in love with because you might see him on the surface and say, oh, well, he's sort of like Donald Trump. Well, he is, but he's not. He's sort of, if you ever wondered, what if there really was a method to the madness? What if all the times this person seemed unhinged or sent crazy tweets or did this, there really was a strategy behind that? Well, that's Rawson Griggs. If he ever does something or says something that seems off the wall, it's not. He's put a lot of thought into it. And Elena Griggs, the sort of, the poised daughter of this billionaire, but she's different though. She doesn't love the spotlight the way her father does. She kind of envies having a normal life. She married a normal guy who's as far away from the political and financial realm as possible because she didn't want to follow in her father's footsteps. Now, she's sort of been forced into that role, but that creates friction between her and her father that gets played out as the story goes along. So that's sort of where my book came from. I'd want to write a really good thriller with characters that were maybe familiar, but once you read the book, really just seemed very unique in their own rights.
I don't know if any of you guys sit down, like, here's the theme of my book. I mean, this isn't like 11th grade English class. However, having read all these books, there is a very strong theme in all of them, and I'm wondering at what point, for instance, Nick, you're talking about, our never-ending wars and with the PTSD and Islamophobia, and you have certainly race relations, and you have, obviously the election. And I'm wondering at what point did that take over? Because coming away from all of your books, and anybody can grab this question at any point, did you realize you're writing, all novels are social commentaries in a sense, but these novels in particular seem to be making a statement. Even we're talking about just the fast pace stopping, this 9/11 from happening again. I mean, some real themes emerge about our fate and what we have to do and the lines we have to cross. With Pike Logan is somebody who kind of treads that line between lawful and lawlessness. And so I'm just wondering at what point you guys picked up on that.
Yeah, that's actually a theme that permeates my books quite a bit, and it's not, I actually don't plan it this way, it just ends up happening, is a theme of the greater good. Actually, it's a juxtaposition of the greater good versus utilitarianism, or categorical imperative. Some things are always, always, always bad. You will not do them. Law, land, warfare, for instance, is the 10 Commandments. It's a categorical imperative. Thou shalt not kill. The abortion debate, that goes between the greater good and categorical imperative. No, you will never, ever, ever, ever do an abortion unless it saved the life of the mother. Well, then you've stepped into the greater good. And that, in our national security affairs, happens all the time. You have the torture debate. You have all these debates in national security affairs in the grand scheme of things. Torture debate. We will never, ever, ever torture unless there's a nuclear bomb in New York City and he knows where it is. Well, then you stepped in the greater good. And that duality is something that my characters go through quite often is when do I stop? When does that become a bad thing? When is the greater good no longer good? And I like kind of showing the moral complexity of the, I would call it the battlefield, but it's not really a battlefield. But in the movies and things like that, there's always the guy's doing the right thing every single time. When Jack Bauer drills somebody's kneecap, it's for the right reason. I'll tell you, when you're in combat, you make decisions, they don't always go right. And you live with that decision. There are things that happen that go wrong. Everything's not perfect in the world. And I try to show that as well. There's bad events that happen, even if you meant for the good thing to happen, bad things occur. And you live with that decision when you're done. It doesn't go away. You don't get a do-over. It's not a video game where somebody gets refreshed. And so I try to show that through the books. I don't set out to do that. It's not preaching or anything. It just ends up happening while I'm writing it.
Yeah, and I didn't really set out to write about. I set out to write a character who was a veteran, but I didn't. I got to the end of the first draft and I realized that basically everybody in the book had had some wartime experience or had been affected by somebody who had wartime experience. So I got to the end of that draft and I thought, oh, I guess I'm writing about this, and I felt incredibly insecure because I've never served overseas. I've never been in the Army. It was not anything that I had ever done, and but I had been having these conversations. That book took me 5 years to write. I'd been having these conversations for 5 years, and I never thought the book would get published. And then about a month before it was going to come out, I kind of had this holy shit moment. Like, people are going to actually read this book, and what are they going to think? It's been, I mean, this has sort of become, in a way, sort of the theme of the series, which is sort of how do people move on from this incredibly profound and potentially really traumatic experience. But I get people send me letters, people send me books, people send me copies of the pages of their journal when they were going into the Marines. I mean, it's crazy stuff. So whatever it is that I'm channeling something. I don't know quite how, but it's a really interesting process. And so I mean, part of it is that moral center, and that, my character breaks the law all the time. I mean, and I didn't want to have a cop because I've been self-employed my whole life. I don't know what it's like to live in a bureaucracy or to have any of those, I mean, it was purely, just laziness on my part, basically. But I think crime fiction, going back to the beginning, has had this strong tradition of social commentary, more than really anything. And it's you can do anything, writing a mystery or a thriller, and that's part of what makes it so fun. And it's part of what makes this wide range of books so fascinating, is because everybody is riffing on different things.
Well, I want to thank you first for just admitting how lazy you are, because on the way over here, Danny and I were talking about the last time we had a 9-to-5 job, and we were going back into the last century, we were going back a long way, and I'm glad it's just not us. Clearly it's a theme with writers. Danny.
Okay, well, I mean, if I got to be straight up about it, I set my story in 1952, and I get the question in interviews a lot, were you making a statement about race in America in 2017 by setting your book in 1952? And, I didn't intend to. I guess I set the book in 1952 for a number of different reasons, but if the past indicts the present, then I can't help that. I can't.
Stuff comes out.
I mean, it comes out, but I think what I mean to say is I didn't pick the period. I picked 1952 because, I have familiarity in that. Well, I'm from Chicago, first of all. I was raised by folks from that generation, second of all. I watched a lot of things unfold as a result of being born in 1971, and it was a pretty sweet time. It's after the Voting Rights Act is passed. From within the doggone Black Power movement, we're coming in. We're seeing fractioning. We're seeing strife. I watched crack hit. I watched hip hop come of age. The thing is I chose 1952 because I wanted Elliot Caprice, my protagonist, to run alongside the dawning of the civil rights movement. He's living and existing, and he's working, as an investigator along the fringes of the civil rights movement, the very bleeding edges of it. And also at the same time, in the 50s, that's when the Chicago outfit had risen to power. And, a lot of what ended up happening that cemented Chicago organized crime's hold in the Midwest was a lot of the ways they did black folks, especially on the south and west sides of Chicago. Burning them out, having these covenants with government and having these covenants with the police department. And these are stories that are riveting. These are stories that are fun. These are stories that are interesting. Intrigue, deception, all that kind of stuff, right? But, if setting a story in 1952 makes 2017 and 1952 look very close to each other, well, I didn't mean to do that. That's just how it looks. I think, and one of the other things, and just in brief, well, crime means something different to black people in America than it does everybody else. Because, this is going back to when the first cops on patrol were slave patrols. Keeping folks in the fields working, keeping the slaves in the fields from getting into beefs and killing each other because it ruins the investment. Escaped slaves, bounties for escaped slaves. When you grow up in an African American household in a big city, crime is a part of your life. Black folks live lives mired in crime. We live lives colored by crime. The face of crime in America is a black face, as exemplified, by Dukakis's total destruction over Willie Horton. So, when you're black and you write crime fiction, just by virtue of being true to your own cultural influences, you're going to offer a different perspective of the same stuff. Now, I grew up reading pulp stuff, and I grew up reading hard-boiled stuff, and, I lived across the street from the biggest public works library project in Chicago in the Midwestern history, Carter G. Woodson Public Library. I was pulling Rex Stout and Raymond Chandler and these guys off the shelves, and nobody was stopping me. There was no Curious George for Danny. It was ugly stuff in there, right? But, even while I'm reading this stuff, it still was never lost on me that, the classic period of hard-boiled tropes was pretty much the most abjectly the most abjectly in-your-face racist period in American history, aside from whatever happened last week. And so, I just have to make these characters real. I just have to make them real people. And whatever I'm saying about race from within there, it's just saying itself, man. There's something between the way the notes are blending together. Maybe you can get that, but that isn't what I meant to do. But I did want to show black folks being black. And in Chicago, in a really dangerous time in history, and it just shook out that way. So I didn't stop it. When I realized what I was doing and other people were telling me what I was doing, I didn't go back and change it because I was afraid of what people would think of me or what I was writing. I just let it flow. I just went with it. Sort of like, I didn't think anybody was ever going to read the goddamn thing. I didn't think it was ever going to get published. For a minute there, it wasn't going to get published. And then all of a sudden now folks are reading it and they're asking me all these questions, and it's just like, okay, cool. If that's what it is for you, then that's what it is for me too. And I kind of have to own every reaction to that. But if it gives people some pause and it makes people consider issues about race in America, I'll own that. I'll cop to that. I'll pay for that if I got to cover the freight on that. I'm willing to do that if it helps.
I think one of the trickiest things that theme-wise that I dealt with in the book was ironically writing a book that I guess could be categorized as a political thriller, in that in a way, I almost didn't want it to be political, and that might not make a lot of sense, but I didn't want people, when I was writing about Rawson Griggs, who's obviously modeled on somebody from the 2016 election, I didn't want people to think that I was bashing Republicans, or that another way I was bashing Democrats or this, because I viewed the character as more elemental than political, as somebody that wanted to come in and really just, not just turn the political establishment upside down, but almost eviscerate it, literally crumble the entire thing and have it built back up in the way that he wanted. And I didn't think that was a political thing. I thought that was just, I really saw him as more of a hurricane or a tsunami or an elemental thing that came in and changed the world. So it was a very fine line, because I wanted to write this character with a lot of things that were true to what was going on at the time, and a lot of the things that and doing a lot of things that the candidates were doing at the time, but I didn't want it to be an indictment of a certain political party, because I really did feel that what was happening was indicative of the person rather than the party. But that said, I wanted a lot of the things that went on and things that I learned through interviews and research to be dealt with very much in the book. It shocked me to the degree to which, as I'm sure will shock many of you, the degree to which money permeates politics, and a lot of the sort of like underhanded campaign things that people do. For example, the coordination between political campaigns and their super PACs, which is sort of a quote-unquote no-no. A campaign is not allowed to have a coordination with their super PAC, but I'll tell you what they then do. So this is my father here in the front row. Let's say I'm running for president, and my father is running a Go Jason super PAC. Now, I'm not allowed to speak with him. He's not allowed to speak with me. He can't coordinate and give me money. But what I can do is post on my website and say, hey, here's my schedule for the next month. I'll be in Des Moines. I'll be in Little Rock. I'll be in Salt Lake City. I'll be in Portland, etc. His super PAC can then check out my website, scheduling, he'll be in Portland on the 22nd. Let's schedule a big rally and rent out a big ballroom, and we'll pay for that so his campaign doesn't have to. Now, that is legal because technically I didn't coordinate that with them. So all these various ways that campaigns can sort of get around all these financing laws and essentially take advantage of hundreds of millions of dollars that their campaigns don't actually have, but are raised through other various means. So I wanted to focus sort of on those things, all the little sort of dirty tricks that campaigns and politicians could do that weren't relegated to one party. Democrats do it, Republicans do it. And so it's important to me to straddle that line a little bit to make sure that even if these characters were very familiar, you didn't finish the book thinking, this guy hates conservatives, this guy hates liberals, because that's not what I wanted at all. Because I really did see the character as more like almost like the Joker in some ways in Batman. He's elemental. You can't stop him, And that was sort of the tricky thing for me is the themes of everything that's happening in politics, but not have it be expressly political towards one party or another.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. How much of the book, when you're all said and done, are all the dirty tricks and everything you're talking about is something that you personally were told about or experienced or researched and said, okay, that's there? Or did you step over the line as a novelist and say, and then this happens and it's...
I mean, there are definitely things that I might have taken a liberty with, but I did a story, I wrote an article a while back where I actually talked to a guy who had been an advisor to Mitt Romney at one point, and we're talking about the FEC, and he was saying how FEC that new rules in the FEC can't change rules because I believe it's just like a 6-person panel, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, so it's deadlocked consistently. That was like a detail that I wanted to put in the book, so that was real. There are certain things that I might have embellished a little bit for storytelling, but I did want there to be enough in there that were culled from people I spoke to. So I would say there's enough fact in there that if people read something and it kind of smells true and they go to Google and they can find all sorts of things to back it up, that is in there.
And that's why people read crime in a way, is because there's this verisimilitude about life, right? You like a police procedural, so how do cops work? Yeah. What is that like? Yeah.
Well, I always say, I've been a Michael Connelly fan for 20, 30 years at this point, and he writes about cops, as well as anybody, if not better than everybody. but you do have to take a little bit of creative license, because if Harry Bosch had killed as many people in real life as he has in his books, I mean, he would have been committed to a mental asylum or gotten the death penalty years ago. Cops don't kill that many people. It's a very rare occurrence, but you take a little bit of creative license for dramatic storytelling effect. These long-running series, like, you have a cop who's killed 30 people over the course of the series, and you would be declared a mass murderer at that point, not a cop.
As you can see from my shirt, I'm a big fan of Catcher in the Rye. Huge fan of Catcher in the Rye. I named my son Holden because Catcher in the Rye, but there's a great line at the end of the book. And this is one of the cool things about being a writer. And the line is something like, when you finish a really great book, you wish you were personally friends with the author so you could call them up and ask them questions. And I get to do that right now because I got to read 4 amazing books, and they're all sitting here. I can ask them specific questions to their books. And so what I want to start with is Nick. And this is just from my own personal interest, because I also read about a character with PTSD, and you do such a good job of nailing what Peter's going through. I'm wondering how much of that, and Hillary and I have talked about this before, where you become your character. It becomes a part of you. And as I'm reading what's going through Peter's life, I can feel his anxiety, I can feel that PSD, I can hear that white static, and I'm wondering if any of that transferred over into you while you were writing, if you felt as though you actually took on some of those characteristics, because you do such a good job of capturing who he is and the trauma he's going through.
Well, part of it was just pure research. So basically, a big chunk of post-traumatic stress, sort of one of the commonalities, is basically a panic attack. So what does a panic attack feel like? So what are the physical components of it, and that's what helps you feel the emotional components of it. And claustrophobia is results in a panic attack, and then so this is all sort of part of this comes from my reading articles and personal essays by people who've been through some of this stuff. But I have asthma, so for a long time it's gotten better because the meds have gotten better, but for a long time I would get a really bad case of bronchitis every year. And when you have bronchitis, your lungs fill with liquid, so you feel like you're drowning. And so part of that, and I used to wake up in the middle of the night and have to go grab my rescue inhaler and go sit outside in the cool night air. And I mean that's a panic attack. So part of that is just I don't have post-traumatic stress. I don't, but that's, I think, somewhat something of a universal experience. For you're in a situation where so part of it is just sort of pulling from that for me. But I don't know that I tried especially hard. Everybody asks me where I came up with the name, the white static, and it's just the first thing that came out. But it's just sort of this thing that kind of boils up in the back of your head, and whether it's anger or fear or panic, I mean, you have that point where the animal part of you takes over, and that's also part of what post-traumatic stress is about. It's the wiring in our brain. A traumatic experience, whether it's being in a war or being raped or being in a natural disaster, rewires your brain. So part of it is that what is that animal self? How is that animal self reacting? So it's got to be physical.
Brad, you can tell me if I got this reading wrong, but when I was reading, I'm trying to understand what motivates Pike as a character. And when I finished the book, I decided, and I could be totally off base, and let me know if I am, but what drives him are the ones that he can't save. Much like Johann, the same idea where the Fonzie character, all the good he does, Johann. I hope I'm not giving too much away, but the idea that the ones you can't save are the ones that haunt you, and I felt as though that's what keeps Pike going. Is that close?
Yeah, that is close. Actually, obviously, this is the 11th one. So in the very first one, there's a lot of character development of what's going on with him. And he actually basically falls apart because huge spoiler if you're going to read the first book, he loses his family while he's deployed, which was a perennial fear we all had. If you deployed, I'm supposed to be in danger, and you hear that somebody's wife got hit by a car and got killed. That was just the worst thing ever. And so his worst nightmare comes true, and now he spends a lot of time. eventually gets back. Now by this book, he's kicking butt and taking names. And it is definitely that. He actually has a soft spot for Johann. Johann's not a very good guy. Even though Johann has some characteristics that end up being good, he does some bad things too. And Pike's got a soft spot for him because he looks at it black and white. Hey, Johann saved those 3 people. Johann's good. Jennifer, on the other hand, looks at it as, wait a minute. That
I think his line was something like he has a white hat, but it's a little stained.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm looking the other ways, basically, because they're going to arrest him and take him away. And Pike's like, you want him run, I'll let you go. Because you did a lot of good here. Jennifer, his partner in crime, on the other hand, she's much more black and white. And like, wait a minute, he's got some problems with him. But it definitely is. And Jennifer's going more that way too. A few books back, she had some combat trauma. There's like real life. Not everybody lives at the end of the day. And so I've had some characters which I now kick my ass over that I ended up killing, which I never should have done. I still get emails about it too. I really wish I hadn't done it, but I did it. It made sense for that book, but now I wish I could bring them back. Can't, though. But I'd agree with that.
I mean, there really should be a support group for people who have killed characters and you wish you could bring them back. Because I too mourn the loss of character. I'm like, God, I wish you were back. Like, he had to die at that point, but then you're like, I really miss him. I miss him.
Definitely.
I want him back.
After you spend so much time developing them, then I was like, what am I thinking?
Okay, now I'm probably a little bit further off with you, Jason, because of I don't have to tell you, I live on the left coast. I live in Berkeley, basically, so you can figure out my ideology pretty quickly. But reading your book, I couldn't help but feel a certain degree of wish fulfillment. And you clearly just said that's not what you want to happen. But in a way, I felt as though you were writing an injustice, and I read it that way. And it can be read a number of ways, because the ending isn't what you would think would happen. So it can be read a number of different ways. But while I was reading it, I couldn't help but feel like you were kind of rewriting history a little bit.
It's funny. It was the Castle got reviewed in Publishers Weekly, and there was a line in there that I absolutely loved, and they said, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, you're either going to cheer on the ending or think it's fake news. And I thought that was pretty apropos, because I'm not giving anything away, but obviously with the current political situation, there is not an ending. I fully intend Donald Trump to challenge term limits. But that was sort of when, like I said, when I've written before, I generally have an idea of how I want a book to end. The thing is, for this book, I kind of didn't know. And a lot of it actually stemmed on the character of Elena, his daughter, because when I started thinking about the book and I actually started writing the book, she was a very different character than she ended up being. And that was, she determined the way she became. I had it in my mind that she was essentially going to be her father's daughter and this very sort of bold, ambitious, take no prisoners, fuck 'em all young woman. But actually, she ended up being a lot more interesting and deeper and different than that, where she really resists her family's name and resists the fame and resists it and kind of would almost prefer a simpler life. And because of that, her actions dictated the ending of the book. And I don't want to give anything away, but I think that's sort of, where the sort of wish fulfillment thing comes in. But my feelings on the current political climate are not, and I think I've even said this because I'm pretty active on Twitter, is that my distaste for the current politicians really has nothing to do with party. It has everything to do with personality and morality. So if there's any sort of comeuppance there, it's not because I'm left-wing and wanted to see a right-wing comeuppance or vice versa. It was because I did want there to be a little bit of, you do bad things and hopefully you don't get away with them. That's not always the case. And it doesn't even happen in this book necessarily. But I've always been, from my youngest days, I've always loved the sort of epic stories of good versus evil. I grew up on epic fantasy. I grew up on Terry Brooks and Piers Anthony. And sort of like, my favorite thing was find like a 1,000-page novel and just hide under the covers for hours and hours at a time. And so I think every story that I write in some way sort of boils down to that sort of good versus evil. But as you get older and matured a little bit, you're never quite sure who's good and who's evil. And even my character, Remy Stanton, I didn't want him to be sort of a white knight. When he takes the job on the campaign, he enjoys it. He enjoys the fame. He enjoys the notoriety. He takes advantage of a little bit. He finds that, hey, all these women kind of like me now. They see me on the cover of all the newspapers. They see me interviewed on TV, and I'm getting random Facebook messages from attractive women. That's kind of awesome. I'm going to go along with that. So even my protagonist, the character that you want to follow along and you want to admire, he has a couple dings in his shield. I think that's sort of where it came from, in that I didn't want it to be expressly political, but really more moral in some way.
I think we're going to take some questions shortly, but I wanted to ask you something really fast, Danny. Just on the subject of sidekicks, you have one of the more interesting sidekicks going, and it starts. I'll give you the beginning of the book, where it starts in the prison, and Elliot has to teach a young man his place, and later on they cross paths again. But that dynamic, can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, well, yeah. Okay. I'm black.
Spoiler.
And Spoiler. And and I grew up in the big city, and I have a novel. I've been on TV telling jokes, but I do have scarred knuckles. And rarely did you find somebody who was your ace in life. Your tightest homie is a cat that you most likely had a fist fight with first. There's, I think Elliot has a line where eventually if you read it, like, I always try to keep this part a secret because, it's my first novel and it's a mystery, and, I don't want to give anything away. But if I don't, then nobody's going to want to read the damn thing. So there's a character, Frank Fuquay, and there's a lot of colorism from within the tribe. Elliot's lighted in a paper bag. Frank Fuquay's nickname that he detests, but it sticks, is Big Black. And so, there's a heck of a pecking order. Everybody's just like, sleeping on top of each other. A really hot August weekend in jail in St. Louis. There's going to be some galvanized steel buckets that are getting more full than other ones, and you got to pee. So, hey, man, that's my bucket. Hey, man, that's my cot over there. And, you look for who you can rough with. So Elliot walks into jail, and, he's looking worse for wear. He had a run-in with some cats, and, he got hit in the head. They brought him in unconscious. So he looks ripe for, the hustle. He looks ripe for the picking. And, there's fighting when you're big and you're young and you're strong, and then there's fighting when you made your living incapacitating people or worse. And so Frank learns soon. And then there's a line between the two of them when they're sharing a moment once you can see they can actually relate with one another. Elliot tells Frank at first in the nasty floor in the jail cell, we's all afraid up in here, Big Black. Like, you don't have to carry on as afraid as you are, and you think you're not letting anyone know, if you think you've got it hidden well, no, we're all shitting ourselves right now. So you don't have to behave as if you're not afraid. We're all afraid. And he gets it, and he lets him off the hook. Now, Elliot didn't want a tag along. He's not looking for a sidekick. He's certainly not looking for a magic, like a noble savage, right? But they see each other later, and they're sharing a meal. And Elliot says, that was a nasty bit of business back there in the jail cell when we met each other. Jail's a nasty place. It's kind of hard not to be nasty right along with it. And, that's sort of what growing up in the big city when I was a short pants was like. They say, rough situations make for strange bedfellows. Well, I mean, that's just kind of, having to grow up, honestly, in the hood. It's just, you never know who's going to, starts out being your friend, and you wind up being competitors for the same thing. And you never know who winds up being a nemesis and then ends up being the guy that'll stand up for you in the most difficult situation. And I think perhaps one of the benefits of having to come up that way is that you're tested, and the folks that you're with are tested right along with you, and the chaff gets separated from the wheat very efficiently by life in our current society, man. So I kind of wanted to show that. I wanted to, like we all, you guys write about soldiers, and you guys write about folks who have been through combat. I wouldn't liken this situation that I'm describing to that. But you come to gel together with the folks that you've been in the shit with. And, there's a whole lot of different types of shit in the world. And these guys were in the shit. And you have your metal tested alongside each other in certain situations. I would always be the lighter one among everybody that was hanging out with all the roll dogs. And then so when the cops pulled us over, this is back when they actually talked to you when they pulled you over, not. And so, the cops asking me what's going on. Because, I'm lighter than a paper bag, I have curly hair, so, the cop thinks he can relate with me. Or if it's a cop that's darker than a paper bag, I'm the guy who's in handcuffs because he don't like me because I'm pretty. It's that kind of thing. Like, you never know. It's always one thing or the other when you're dealing in society. So, the cat whose ass you got to kick could wind up be the guy that you call brother down the line. It usually happens that way. It's been my situation.
You didn't ask to be this pretty. I'm just saying that's
That's
it's just your burden to bear.
Hey man, I gotta tell you.
I know it's tough. I
it
should
is.
ask, how long are we going? You got to do some questions? Anybody have questions, comments, observations?
Wow. I didn't know I was going to get a mic. I might not ask. From a writing perspective, what y'all have obviously spent some time practicing your craft. What is something when you were a young or a novice writer that was a piece of advice maybe that somebody gave you that you wish you would have followed that has come back to you as you got better in your craft to say, man, I wish I would have listened to that, or I wish I would have learned that earlier?
I got a really good one. Write faster. Because you can fail more quickly, and you make your mistakes more quickly, and that's how you learn. It took me 15 years and 3 books I couldn't get published. I wish I'd written those 3 books in 5 years, because I would have learned those lessons faster. So that's something I tell people on a regular basis. Is write faster. Don't be afraid to screw up and throw it away and start. I got 3 books in a drawer. I know a lot of writers who have a lot of books in drawers. So that's kind of my thing.
As writers, I think we're naturally more comfortable in our heads. James Patterson has a great line. He says his career took off when he put the story ahead of the sentence. It's really tough, I think, for a lot of writers to have that external conflict on the page. We're more interested in the thought processes and 2 guys sitting in a cafe talking for 800 pages. Nobody wants to read 2 guys talking for 800 pages. They want you read for the story. You read for the page to be turned. So the stuff we really like, those really pretty sentences, that's important, but it's kind of down your list. What you have to do is give them a reason to turn the page to the next page.
See, that ruined my next book. Was going to be 800-page novel. It was going to be set in Le Pen quotidian for 800 pages. So you just ruined everything.
You said your 11th book in this series. Now I haven't read the first 10. So the challenge of writing a series, and talking to I guess you both write series. I think Jason's written a series also. Is jumping in. How do you?
Yeah, it's.
How do you keep that fresh? How do you get a new reader who hasn't read the first 10 books?
It is really challenging, and I'll be honest. I never, like everybody else, I'm sure, I never thought I'd have a single book. I mean, I didn't. If I had a brain in my head, I would have some kind of arc and said, by book 22, I'll be here. I didn't. I throw everything on the page at the time I'm writing that book. And then the next book comes along, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, if you had a forethought, you shouldn't have done A, B, C, and D in that book because you've really boxed yourself in. The hardest thing are the characters. I think I do a pretty good job on the villains, and I think the reason I do is because they're a blank slate for that one book, and I can really build them up. But the series characters have to evolve because humans evolve. That's what they do. Nobody remains the same. And so it's real hard keeping the evolution going without becoming trite or something like that. They
Or
have to be
repeating
humorous.
yourself. You don't want to
Exactly.
repeat yourself.
Yeah. And I think I've done a pretty good job on it. Like I said, Pike was his moral compass was completely shattered, and he was a waste case by book 1. By now, he's back to pretty much where he was. And Jennifer was a black and white prima donna, and now she's running around kicking people's butts. And no, you don't have to. The only thing that happens, I work real hard to make sure every book's a complete standalone. You don't have to. The only thing you might get if you read this book before the others is in this book will be a spoiler as they talk about something in the past, but you won't even know it's a spoiler, and you probably won't remember it by the time you get to that book. So there.
I just said I was dead. So he wrote a series, and you have to put him killing of the character. And one of the things early on, Jason had a character, Henry Parker, who had a love interest. And Jason said, "Dad, you got to see this email." He sent some of his books actually to military bases, and it came back from troop so and so in Afghanistan, whatever. Dear Jason, thank you so much for the books. We really love the books, but we get a sense that the female protagonist, something bad is going to happen to her, and we really like her a lot. So please, we're going to be discharged soon if we're armed. We'd like nothing to happen to her.
Nothing makes you rethink your story than getting a death threat from somebody who's literally stationed at a military base in the Middle
I get that
East,
a lot
but,
after I whack decoy. I get those all the time now. Whoa! Actually, I just finished my next manuscript, and the title is Operator Down. And so everybody's like, holy moly, he's killing somebody.
No, I just did a book group, and they really said, like, just please don't ever kill this character. And I'm like, no problem, just don't read third book, and you're fine. All right? As long as, just stay away from book 3, you're going to be okay.
My situation is not dissimilar, but just, essentially different because, it's like it's my debut novel and it's the first of a series, so I'm a double idiot because if nobody reads the first one, I won't be able to continue to tell these stories in this series that I really want to. Like sometimes I just like I had an aborted first edition with a publisher of perhaps of not ill repute, some known repute.
It's ill repute. I think that's safe to say.
Well, you could call it that. And I ain't judging, man. I'm not judging. I'm just happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you so much. And so the thing that hurt, because I was told it was dead in the water. I was told another publisher wouldn't touch it. I was told it was already shop worn, had fingerprints all over it. I heard a lot, and I was happy for the advice, and I learned a lot. But the thing that I found bothered me was that, like, you bring up Frank. I was like, man, y'all just don't know. You all just won't know what this guy's life is by book 3 now. You won't know how he went from an ass-kicking in a jail cell in the first chapter of the first book in the series to what he will be if I make it to a book 4. Like, you don't. And I actually I was very sad about that. I was, book 2, Elliot made mention of some gal it didn't work out with in Chicago, and maybe we meet her in book 2. Maybe we get to see what Elliot Caprice is like when he has to do his business while he's in angst and love, like a kid all over again. Like, I won't be able to do that. There's like a mule that dies, and the mule. So yeah, where you guys are like, damn, I shouldn't have did that. I was like, oh, I'm not gonna be able to do that. And so that's kind of, that's my irrelevant beginner's flip. But I had to get in there somewhere because it was getting too quiet.
I have a feeling there's going to be a book 4.
Yeah, it better be.
I have that feeling.
I think
only me, you, and Ingram.
There you go.
I think one of the toughest things about writing a series is sort of like, figuring out, from book 1 to book 11 is how do you write each book as a standalone while also being kind of true to the characters? Because in each book, there's going to be a certain amount of character development or new characters. And it's almost like, in some ways, you also have to make a choice between, do you just go sort of like the Lee Child route where really, every book is sort of a new Jack Reacher adventure. You can pick up book 1 or book 19 and not really miss anything in between. It's almost like TV where you put on an episode of like Law and Order. And you don't need to know a single thing. It's an entertaining story. You don't need to know about the backstory. Maybe, didn't Benson have a boyfriend in the last episode? Oh, who cares? Or versus something like The Wire or The Shield or Game of Thrones, where if you have never seen it and you put on episode 5 in season 4, you're not going to have any idea what the hell is going on. Why are there dragons and naked women everywhere? But that's the tricky thing about a series is how do you write each book as a total standalone where somebody can jump in at book 8 and not know anything, or do you really try to have the characters grow and change and be different, and to the point where somebody reading book 8 maybe feels the character's richer, but people who read book 8 will completely be lost. And I think that's something I haven't totally figured out yet.
Well, and every writer is sort of figuring out their own way to toe that line, and I'm with you guys. I think the characters need to evolve. The question is at what pace. I think about like Easy Rollins, right? Walter Mosley. They're like 5 or 6 years or between books, right? So his life jumps, which is really cool.
Right. Or then you've got Himes and Cottonhead and Gravedigger, right? And their job is just to be detectives in Harlem for the police department. So, and it's the other folks coming in and out of Harlem that make up like the basis of the story. But
Right.
they'll always be these two guys that are all about the law and order, and in Harlem. Yeah, I mean, I get it. Like I was thinking about Easy. When you mentioned it, that was on my mind. Like you've got these mini arcs in the overall progression in Easy Rollins' life. And, you might find out a little something in chapter 1 by the time we get to Black Betty about something that went down in Devil in a Blue Dress, but then maybe not really. It may be relevant, it may not. Actually, Mosley would be a perfect example here because he gives you these mini eras in this guy's life. At some point we move on. You do somebody dirty, 10 years from now you go, well, he had it coming. You may have felt guilty about it 2 years after the fact. Then you may have gone back to resenting the guy for making you do it 4 years after that. And then by the time you get to the 9th year, it's just like, I'm tired of being guilty about this shit. I'm going to move on. And then something happens in your 11th year since you did that one guy dirty where it reminds you that you did a guy dirty. And it's like, this is just like back then. And I guess writing can, if we're writing humans, if we're putting real flesh and blood humans of our own invention on the page, maybe we just schwitz it too much. Maybe it shouldn't matter at all because they'll be real people.
Well, I think that it comes back to character, right? So what do those people want? What do they want out of their lives? What do they want their lives to become?
Our dysfunctions remain. Like, I'm almost done with book 2. And the shit that Elliot Caprice wouldn't admit to himself in book 1 are the things that ruin they fucking shut up in book 2. And, I live in Los Angeles. I've been to therapy a few times. I've done some yoga. Stuff bubbles up.
Do you own yoga pants?
Well, there are people who say I should buy them, especially those in front of me, or folks behind me, and I got the mat in front of them. They always suggest yoga pants. I'll never do it, but
Well, and I also stole a trick from Lee Child, which is that my books each take place in a different location. I'm really interested in place. I'm really interested in setting, and I never want my reader to be halfway through a book and to say, "Oh shit, I read this before." And I have had that experience, and I don't enjoy that experience. And so that's one way to make the books different. So you keep the characters moving forward, but it's to set it in a different place. It's a whole new character that can they could go back to that place. They don't have to go back to that place. Then and it lends each book sort of a different tone and flavor. So my first book is set in Milwaukee. So it's kind of a gritty working class. Kind of story. The second book takes place on the West Coast, so it's all about kind of technology, and it's the same hero, and he's dealing with different things, and it's the things that would come up in that place. So the third book takes place, which comes out in January, by the way, at your local bookstores. It takes place in Colorado. So I'm writing about cannabis entrepreneurs. So that's a Colorado story.
You set it up well with the drifter being a guy who's going to go from place to place to place to place. This idea of a drifter character. So,
Yeah.
you know, as I'm reading that, I can picture him in any of these cities because you really could put Peter Ash anywhere, and he's going to still be.
But what he wants more than anything is a home. So part of it is, what is that search for? How does he find that? And you know, like all of us, the goal is to sort of find it in yourself.
And
so
if you give your character what he wants, you don't have a book anymore.
No,
I mean,
it's boring. Yeah, no, there
two
can't.
people who love each other very
He'll
much.
write a
and nothing
story,
ever
then
goes
he'll do the
wrong.
home inspection.
There's no story.
Yes.
It'll carry on.
Yes.
Right. So it's always the search. It's always something you can't quite. You can almost get. You can get a taste of, but it's always going to be elusive. Otherwise, you have no propulsion, and you're stagnant.
Right.
I want to thank David in the Strand. If there's any more questions, I'm sure everybody's here except for Jason, who I know is running out. But he has an excuse because he has a newborn at home, so he is forgiven. He is allowed to leave, no questions asked. He's never going to sleep again, so wish him well. Thank you so much for coming tonight, everybody, all the panelists.
Thank you.